I stumbled upon 3 disturbing true bar horror stories that left me shaking in terror. I never should have opened that door. Just another Friday night, right? I was on my usual grind, heading to McGinty's, our local dive. The neon lights buzzed like angry bees, and the air smelled of spilled beer and soggy fries. It was comforting. But tonight? Tonight felt different. The shadows danced in the corners, thick and alive. I shivered before I even stepped inside. I ordered my drink, the bartender's face washed in green from the glowing taps. He leaned in close. "You heard about the haunted jukebox," he whispered, eyes darting. My heart dropped. It was just a story, right? But I could feel the energy shift. The laughter faded to hushed voices. "They say a girl lost her life here years ago. She vanished without a trace. Now, her spirit is tied to that jukebox. They say it plays eerie tunes out of nowhere sometimes, just a whisper of a song you can't quite place." I glanced over. The jukebox sat in the corner, silent, but I swore I felt it watching me, and then, the lights flickered. A shiver crawled down my spine. People fumbled for their phones, faces lit up in panic. Was it just a power surge? Or was something more sinister lurking? I couldn't shake the feeling. I could almost hear her. The faintest melody slipped through the air, a chilling refrain that sent cold fingers down my back. "Turn it off." Someone shouted, but the jukebox kept humming. I felt frozen. The air was thick, like breathing through molasses. My throat tightened. I could almost see her frantically looking for something, someone. Another story echoed in my mind. A guy had gone missing in the back alley. They found his belongings, but no sign of him. The old-timers said he'd become obsessed with the jukebox. They said it whispered secrets, seducing him into the darkness. My heart raced. I was rooted to the spot, fear gripping me like a vice. Suddenly, it stopped. Silence swallowed the bar whole. Did I imagine the melody? I could feel eyes on me. I turned, and there, just behind me, in the shadowed archway, a figure swayed. I could barely make it out, a flash of white, a face just out of reach of the light. My chest tightened. I should have left. Should have run the hell out of there. But I was glued to the floor. The figure moved closer, and a scream built in my throat. Then the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, drowning out everything. The bar fell into chaos, glass shattering, drinks spilling. All I could see was that figure, the dim light flickering around it, and I felt the world around me fade into darkness. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The air grew thicker with tension as the bar erupted into chaos. Shouting patrons swarmed, desperate to escape, yet I was frozen, transfixed by the figure that hovered just out of reach. She moved impossibly slowly, her long hair cascading like dark water over her porcelain face, but her eyes, if I could have made them out through the shadow, seemed to bore into my very soul. A rush of fear propelled me back, but the shove of a crowd behind me pushed me forward. I collided hard against a table, sending half-empty drinks tumbling to the floor, their contents mixing with glass shards. The jukebox flickered to life again, glitching between recognizable tunes warped and twisted into something otherworldly, echoing eerie melodies that seemed to whisper my name. Help! Someone help me! A desperate cry pulled at my instincts. I looked up to see a young woman, a regular. I recognized her, trapped against the bar, her face pale and frantic. She, too, seemed rooted in place, fingers gripping the counter like a lifeline. Behind her, the figure glided, inching closer, her features becoming more discernible but still shrouded in shadow. "Claire, get out of there!" I shouted, but my voice felt weak and pitiful against the feral panic that enveloped the bar. People shoved past me, desperate for the exit, yet I felt tethered to the ground. The phantoms seemed almost to thrive on their terror, and every tremor in my body screamed to flee, and then, she spoke a soft but piercing sound that rustled the loose papers on a nearby table. "Find me," she whispered, the voice a chilling melody that wrapped around my heart. I clenched my jaw, denying the gasp that struggled to escape. Did she need help, or was she merely a specter playing some cruel joke? The lights flickered again, plunging the bar into darkness, and a sense of disorientation settled over the crowd. Screams morphed into panic-driven cries, feet stampeding, knocking over chairs, a chorus of fear that thrummed in my ears. I staggered forward, instincts clawing at me to help Claire, but I could feel something icy wrap around my heart, urging me to run. Suddenly, laughing morphed into wailing, a guttural sound that vibrated through the air and shook me to my core. The jukebox roared violently, playing a song I recognized, yet it felt twisted. The notes turned malevolent, shrieking like banshees. I glanced back at the ghostly figure, which now stood at the bar, staring directly at the jukebox as if it held the key to her misery. "Find me," she insisted again, the air thick with her unresolved pain, drawing me closer with an invisible string. A wave of sadness crashed over me, the weight of loss so profound I felt like I was drowning. My pulse quickened as I shifted my gaze toward Claire, who was now struggling against invisible hands wrapping around her throat. Desperation surged within me, culminating in an instinctive scream. "Get away from her!" But my voice was drowned out by the crescendoing chaos. The lights burst back to life, and at the same moment, the figure let out a wailing cry that echoed throughout the bar, causing glasses to vibrate on their tables. I stumbled backward, catching a glimpse of the jukebox as it seized life, music exploding from it like a violent eruption. The air thickened, and that mournful melody gripped the room, distorting time. In its notes, I caught a glimpse of shadows unfurling, pulling at my edges until they blurred against reality. Then, at the very heart of this chaos, the ghostly figure turned her attention back to me. The dim light illuminated her face completely, her eyes wide with terror, lips parted to reveal a scream that would never escape. And then she reached out, hand trembling, fingers curling into an almost friendly gesture before suddenly, frightfully, turning toward the jukebox, as if she recognized something. As if something shifted in the air, a daguerreotype of eerie light flickering around us, the shadow behind her began to swell. Fresh terror clawed at my gut. And then, with a spine-chilling crackle of static, the jukebox switched its song to one I had never heard before, a dirge that pulled at primordial fears. Within it, I realized, my name was part of the lyrics. The bloody truth surged in, an awakening of my own repressed memories. Before I could fully comprehend, the figure lunged, and a hollow, plaintive "help me" resonated through me, echoing like a phantom symphony. In the next heartbeat, something heavy fell upon me, an ice-cold grip that snatched away my breath. I was being pulled backwards into the darkness. I fought then with every ounce of strength in me, but terror washed over me, drowning my screams in a cacophony of despair, as I felt the floor beneath me begin to crumble. What was happening? Who was taking me? In the fleeting moment before the world faded, I saw the truth reflected in those ghostly eyes, a dawning horror that asked, would you leave the past behind? And then, everything went black as the jukebox blared its final, haunting tune. The silence that followed the darkness was deafening. I floated in an abyss, detached from my own body, my consciousness swirling in confusion. It felt like falling through layers of cold nothingness, with every second stretching into eternity. My heart had been pushed to its limit, thrumming against the confines of fear, yet my senses felt alive, heightened to an unbearable degree. Then, a cold snap jolted me awake, like ice water poured over my head. I was no longer in the bar, but seated upon the sticky floor of a small, dim room, its wooden walls adorned with old photographs, sepia-toned and warped with age. A flickering light bulb swayed from the ceiling, casting uneven shadows and elongating the faces captured behind glass. The figures stared back at me, their expressions a morbid gallery of surprise, terror, and despair, and I could feel their eyes boring into my flesh that I struggled to my feet, my pulse an erratic metronome on the verge of breaking. Breathing deeply, I glanced back to the origin of the exit, a solid wooden door that seemed to breathe with mock life, its edges curling like a withered leaf. Beneath it, a thin line of crimson crept in, snaking around the floor like blood pooling from a wound. It felt wrong, so utterly foreign, disorienting in its familiarity. The memories crashed into me uninvited, dragging me back to the bar, a place of laughter turned tragic. But mingled with the echoes of past joy were shadows, stretching their long fingers, threatening to pull me into the depths of despair once again. The spectral woman, the terror in her eyes still vivid in my mind, the haunting echo of "help me," wrapped around my throat like a noose, squeezing tighter every second that I took a step forward, but a high-pitched giggle skittered across the room, freezing me in place. The sound was impossible yet inviting, an unspeakable lure that made my head swim. On the wall in front of me, the photographs began to writhe, their subjects shifting, morphing into grotesque parodies of joy, mouths twisted in silent screams. The laughter reverberated, morphing into a sinister chant that circled around me, pulling tighter. Find us, the voices whispered, layered with sorrow and anguish. With every repetition, dread filled my veins until it threatened to overflow. Then I noticed the cracks spreading across the floor, spider webbing in all directions, a ritual of decay sketched out in a macabre artistry that beckoned me forward. Where else could I go? As I hesitantly moved closer, the door rattled, a malevolent gust pushing against it as if something unseen was desperate to enter. Panic closed in, making it hard to breathe. I darted around, scanning the room for any means of escape, noticing a dusty mirror on the wall opposite the door. My reflection stared back, but there was something wrong. It rippled, broke apart like shattered glass, and emerged not as my own features, but those of the ghostly woman. "Help!" the shell of her form whispered through cracked lips, eyes mirroring mine but filled with relentless darkness. They reached for me, the image pulling me closer, inviting yet utterly horrifying. Suddenly, the laughter escalated into a fevered pitch, filling the room like water overflowing a dam, and I could only think to scream. But nothing escaped my lips, it hung in my throat like a stifled sob. Panic coursed through me, matching the desperation that ran in tandem with the whispers, find us before it's too late." Then, darkness at the edge of the room began to pulse and manifest, coalescing into twisted shapes, a whispering shadow that tugged toward me, bending reality itself. The figures in the photographs danced and writhed in opposition, and as I turned back to the mirror, I saw the woman's desperate eyes reflecting my own horror. Before I had a chance to rationalize what was happening, the shadow lunged, and in an instant, I was back on the floor of the bar, the reality distorted. Patrons had returned, but they stood frozen, their expressions voided of life, eyes wide and vacant, trapped in their own nightmare. Then I noticed the jukebox, sinister and alive once more, its lights flashing like a warning. From within its depths emerged not music, but a chorus of wails, each rising above the other, layering the air with unquenchable terror, a cacophony of souls beckoning me back into their eternal cycle. "Find us," they sobbed. With renewed horror coursing through my veins, I turned to run, but the spectral woman stood blocking my only escape, now holding a shimmering object in her hand, an old locket that sparkled with a ghostly light. That in a flash, she opened it, and the world around me tilted, a vortex of swirling memories rushing forth, pulling me into the depths of her haunting past I was suddenly entwined with. I could see faces, the faces from the photographs, their mouths moving in sync with the ghostly wails. Was I one of them? Suddenly, reaching for me was not enough, and I felt myself pulled into the locket, the warmth of its light erasing the line between past and present, engulfing me in a storm of sorrow. It was then I realized, this was a trapdoor, an unending loop of despair, and just as I slipped into the luminous embrace, the room erupted in darkness once more, and from it came a chilling laugh that sent shivers down my spine, as the last tendrils of reality faded away. A beckoning warmth enveloped me as I surrendered, a voice resonating within my mind, clear and dreadful, "You're home now." The air grew colder, as if a winter's breath had swept in, wrapping around me like a choking shroud. Panic faded into a surreal numbness while shadows clawed up the walls in grotesque shapes, whispering of old regrets and forgotten tragedies. I was weightless, suspended in this foreboding void, teetering on the edge of comprehension. Images flashed, rapid fire across my mind: the spectral woman, the terrified patrons, the locket that promised salvation yet brought only damnation. I felt hunted, stalked by the very darkness I believed I had escaped. Every heartbeat reverberated with the memory of her words, "You're home now." My surroundings began to solidify slowly, grainy and disjointed, forming a new landscape fraught with unease. I stood now in what looked like the back alley of the bar, drenched in shadows, the ground slick with something dark and unrecognizable. The stench of decay filled my nostrils, a rancid perfume stitched from the essence of despair and desperation. In my periphery, figures flickered in and out of the murky light, hazy silhouettes locked in a deadly dance, whispering sweet nothings that twisted into awful truths. They seemed to beckon to me, their fingers trailing in the grime as if inviting me to join their grotesque celebration. I staggered back, feeling the barrier of reality thin dangerously. Then I heard Ida's soft whimper, a childlike cry for help filtering through the ghastly laughter that seemed to swallow the air around me. It was distant yet unmistakable, tugging at the very fabric of my being. I was compelled to move closer to the forlorn sound, every heartbeat a drum urging my steps forward into the blackened depths of the alley. I turned the corner, my breath hitching as I beheld a scene bathed in moonlight, illuminating ghostly figures. They gathered around a rusted barrel, shadows dunking in and out of the light, faces twisted with anguish and madness. The cries grew clearer, a sorrowful song ripped from shattered hearts, and panic seized me, tightening its grip around my throat. Among them stood a girl, no older than 10, her eyes wide and shimmering pools of innocence overshadowed by darkness. "Help me," she wept, her voice slipping into the still air, almost swallowed by the howling laughter. Suddenly, the temperature dropped further, frost creeping along the cobblestones. The gathering of shadows shifted uneasily, their laughter morphing into an eerie harmony, a mocking dirge for the young girl. She looked toward me, eyes glistening with tears that threatened to spill. "They won't let me go. You have to help." As the shadows closed in tighter around the girl, I stepped forward instinctively, compelled to rescue her even as dread curled around my spine. "What do you want from me?" I gasped, my voice thin and trembling against the cacophony. "Find me," she echoed, her voice merging with the fabric of night, and suddenly the memories were crashing back: faces, names, a cacophony of stories unfurling in my mind like forgotten tapes unfolding. There was laughter, pain, love, and terror swirling together in an unholy fusion. My heart raced as clarity settled upon me. These were the very souls I had seen in the photographs, their existence tethered to that cursed place. A visceral shriek sliced through the air as the darkness surged forward, a whirlwind of shadows hungry for manifestation. I felt fingers latch onto my ankles, dragging me down, the girl's figure lost within the sea of chaos, her cries echoed through the pulsing void. "Find me. Don't let them take me." Then, from the corner of my eye, a glimmer caught my attention, a shard of silver glistening on the ground. I lunged toward it, adrenaline propelling me forward as everything around me congealed into a singular focus. I grasped the silver object, what remained of the locket, its surface warm against my palm. In that moment, I understood. If I could unlock the past, perhaps I could set them free. But just as I turned to return to the girl, a hollow laugh erupted behind me, reverberating off the damp walls of the alley, sinister and triumphant. The shadows coalesced, pulling me into their heart of darkness. "You think you can save her?" they taunted, their voices seeping into my mind like poison. "You are one of us now." I opened my mouth to scream, but as the world dissolved around me, I felt the sharp coldness wrap itself around my heart. The alley twisted and distorted, plunging me back into the singular darkness, and all that remained was the distant echo of the girl's despair and the promise of my unraveling fate. Just as I was sucked into the void, the last remnants of light slipped away, and I found myself surrounded by an infinite swarm, lost souls with gaping mouths, pleading with eyes that mirrored my own. Before the darkness engulfed me entirely, a single, heart-stopping realization hit me: what if I was never meant to leave? The void turned solid around me, and I felt the weight of countless eyes bearing down like a suffocating shroud. My senses spun wildly, plummeting into the oppressive haze of despair and fear. Whispers curled around me, barely decipherable yet sharp enough to ignite a low-grade panic, a symphony of suffering woven from the tales of shattered lives. I stood in a dim room, flickering, like a broken film reel. Walls were stained with what I could only assume was blood, the pulsing heartbeat of the shadow around me. Familiar faces flitted before my mind's eye, their mouths moving, contorting as if caught in a dance of violence. They screamed silent pleas. The surroundings morphed, like pieces of a jigsaw forced together. I could barely keep hold of my sanity. The air humiliated me, pressing unyieldingly against my skin and whispering confessions of sorrow. Red eyes, glowing like coal embers, flickered in the dismal light. A shudder ran through me, igniting a primal urge to flee, to escape. But where? The walls seemed to shift, entranceways forming and collapsing before me, trapping me in a labyrinth that morphed with every breath I took. It felt as if the very space itself was sentient, mocking my attempts at hope. The room expanded, revealing tortured souls anchored to the walls with grim chains of memory. Faces twisted with grief, eyes swollen with unshed tears. They stretched their arms toward me, their ghostly fingers longing to remind me of the warmth of life, pleading to be freed yet bound by the gravity of their anguish. I stumbled back, bumping into an invisible barrier, a reminder that there was no way out. Then a deep, resonant voice filled the air, wrapping around my being like ice. They can reach out, you know. It's your choice, save them or join them. The voice was both seductive and chilling, matching the rhythm of the swelling dread that escalated in the pit of my stomach. In the periphery, I caught sight of the girl again, her form flickering like a candle struggling against the wind, a beacon in this suffocating darkness. She was mouthing silent words, her eyes pleading. I strained against the weight of despair pressing against my chest, and I tried to move toward her, but something yanked my attention in the opposite direction. A figure emerged from the shadows, ancient and draped in tattered remnants of something once lush. Tension coiled tightly around my throat as I recognized the figure, a woman whose face was hauntingly familiar. It was the spectral woman from the bar, her gaunt cheeks illuminated in an ethereal glow. She smiled, but it was a smile crafted from the shards of bone and sorrow, a reminder of all things lost. "Join us," she whispered, her voice coiling around my mind. "Abandon the mortal coil and become one with the understood." Shivers coursed through me. I fought the impulse to reach for her, to seek comfort in her familiar visage, even though my instinct screamed for me to turn away. The shadows pulsed with her words, as if they ached to draw me into their embrace, to become a part of their tragic narrative. "Find me," the girl's voice continued echoing, her figure wavering, desperation flickering like a feeble flame. I felt my body ache, a clash within one side yearning to reach out and hold the child, to deliver her from the torment that enveloped her. The other side listened to the seductive call of the shadows, begging for me to give in, to sink into the void, save her. I shouted, feeling my voice shatter into a million shards, scattering into the abyss. But all that was returned was the echo of my desperation, mingled with the cruel laughter that jolted through the shadows. The spectral woman drew closer, her chilling hand reaching toward me. With an instinct that danced between fight and flight, I lunged for the girl. "Hold on!" I screamed, forcing my way through the miasma of despair. As I reached out, time stretched, each second unfurling like a flickering flame caught in the wind. I could feel the icy grip of the shadows clawing at my legs, trying to pull me back into their dark embrace. I felt Closido breaking through the barrier that separated us. Then, just as my fingers brushed against hers, a deafening roar filled the air, shaking the ground beneath my feet. A vortex of shadows spiraled around us, the laughter crescendoing into a cacophony of anguish and torment. I watched in horror as the girl's form began to flicker, pixels of light vanishing like tiny fireflies in the night. "Don't let go!" I screamed, despair fracturing my voice. But the shadows shrieked louder, swirling into a storm, consuming everything. The spectral woman leaned closer, her breath cold and cutting. "You are destined to be lost. Become one of us, the connection broke, a visceral severing that sent shockwaves through my very being. The girl's terrified face morphed into a haunting mirage, her eyes wide with confusion and fear as they faded from sight, and just like that, with a final piercing shriek, the vortex shifted into a blinding flash of white. The world disintegrated, pulling me apart as I felt myself hurtling through time and space, the last sound lost in the blare of the shadows' laughter echoing in my ears. As the brilliance dimmed, leaving me gasping in a profound silence, a single thought centered and twisted, a chilling realization coursed through me. What was I if not another lost soul, with her echoing words now ingrained in my heart? Find me. I opened my eyes, finding myself back in the bar, the room swathed in the dull hum of ordinary life, as if nothing ever happened. But the specters of the past lingered, and somewhere in the stillness, I knew she was waiting for me still. Suddenly, my reflection in the mirror shifted, revealing a shadowy figure standing inches behind me. The coldness of her gaze pierced through the veil, whispering words I dared not comprehend. The bar hummed with life, laughter intertwining with the clinking of glasses, a veneer of normalcy that felt almost obscene, given the dark knowledge coiled tightly in the pit of my stomach. My heart raced, the phantom echo of the girl's frightened visage clawing at the edges of my sanity. I turned from the mirror, desperation gnawing at me. Looking around, I felt the familiar faces swirl like specters hidden in the bright lights, each one a possible anchor or a trap. The bartender gave me a casual nod, his friendly demeanor curdling my insides. But it was the woman at the corner booth that arrested my gaze, her eyes burning like smoldering coals, void of warmth. As if sensing my stare, she smiled. The expression twisted across her lips, the corners betraying an unsettling truth. I noticed her fingers, delicate and pale, dancing over the edge of her glass, leaving behind streaks of crimson that soaked into the wood like blood seeping into the earth. They drifted over her drink, a concoction that glimmered ominously, pulsating softly as if it contained a heartbeat of its own. Come join me, she beckoned, her voice smooth yet laced with the cacophony of lingering spirits. I promise you'll never feel lonely again. The shadows around her writhed, and I felt the air grow colder. Unable to look away, I took a shaky step toward her booth. The comforting buzz of the bar faded into a whisper, overtaken by the silence that had haunted me since my encounter with the void, the shadowy realm where anguish lived and breathed. Are you lost? She asked coyly, tilting her head as I approached, her expression delicate but fierce. Her eyes glimmered with something far more ancient than desire, a hunger that predated humanity itself. So many have wandered in here, looking for something they can't quite articulate. I nodded, swallowing hard, searching her face for any sinuous thread of memory. Was she a figure from my past? A lost soul? Take a seat, she coaxed, gesturing to a spot opposite her, where the shadows pooled like dark water. Hesitation gripped me, but the unsettling compulsion to sit rooted my feet in place. I slid into the seat, still battling the whirlpool of uncertainty that churned inside me. Her laughter was like glass shattering in the stillness, bright yet piercing. Let me introduce myself, she said, her voice enveloping me in a warm cocoon, contrasting starkly with the chill creeping up my spine. I am the vessel for many voices, desires, and fears. You seek a connection, dare you to know them? From behind her, the figures of the spectral souls I had encountered in the void began to flicker into existence, faces contorted with sorrow and rage. They wrapped around the bar, their mortified reflections holding the weight of dreams unfulfilled. She leaned in closer, her breath a tantalizing whisper. You will come to know their stories, witness their pain. That I gasped, my heart pounding against my ribs as cold terror knitted every nerve. I don't want to, I rasped, inching back instinctively. But it was too late. The world behind me had begun to dissolve into ribbons of darkness, as her hand reached out to grab mine. The warmth of her skin met mine like a vice, pulling me into a shared consciousness. Suddenly, I was standing on a foundation of ice, the cracked surface reflecting numerous souls trapped beneath, their faces wailing silently, echoes of despair blending into my own. I staggered as a powerful surge of emotion washed over me, each life, a story, each sorrow a jagged shard igniting inside me. Feel them, she whispered, her voice overlapping with their cries, a cacophony that became unbearable. I stumbled to regain control, but I was ensnared in their collective sorrow, feeling every shred of anguish seep into my veins, twisting my own heart. "Stop! I can't!" I screamed, pulling my hand away from hers, but it was as if I was trapped in a nightmare without end. The veil of reality was peeling away, revealing grotesque truths that had lingered just beneath the surface of daily existence, but amidst this flood of torment, one face broke through, a girl, a reflection of the lost one from the void. Her eyes met mine, shimmering with desperation, her thin lips moving as if trying to tell me something vital. I reached out, but her words drowned in the chaos. "Save her. You must find her before." The words shivered through me, laden with urgency, but I couldn't grasp their full weight. The woman's grip tightened, fear coiling around my chest as she smiled broader, revealing a hint of sharp teeth amidst her luscious lips. "Before what?" I demanded, panic bubbling within me. With a quick flick of her hand, shadows erupted around the edges of the bar, darkness coiling and choking the air, pushing us closer to the precipice of madness. "Before the darkness consumes you, too," she revealed, her eyes now voids of voids, spirals dragging me deeper into the abyss. As the shadows closed in, I felt a laughter rise, and then sudden silence. Everything paused as I was torn from that moment. I opened my eyes to find myself back in the familiar bar, but the laughter of patrons had transformed into agonized screams, resonating with the plea that had threaded through my mind. They had all turned to face me, their expressions twisted and soulless, eyes swirling with the darkness that had just engulfed me. The girl from the void was now among them, the terror lit in her eyes as she mouthed the words, "You didn't save me. You brought them instead." The realization that perhaps I had never truly left the void paralyzed me, and I could feel my own reflection laughing back at me from the mirror, mocking my choices, taunting me with an unholy horror. "You thought you could escape? This is just the beginning." And then, as the shadows closed tighter around me, I felt the world spin, the familiar voices of the lost returning, wrapping around my skin like cold fingers, drawing me into their depths, a revelation looming on the horizon, waiting to swallow me whole. The bar's atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. The once effervescent laughter turned to shrieking terror, a cacophony of agony that twisted through the space like a cursed wind. I scrambled for the entrance, heart pounding, a visceral terror unfurling in my chase, an instinct to flee, yet gravity seemed to bind me to the spot. Shadows, hungry and insatiable, crawled along the walls. "Where do you think you're going?" The woman's voice projected above the chaos, silky enough to mask the dread creeping through each word. Her smile had sunken into a sadistic grin, eyes now void pits of malice. "You're already part of this world. You can't escape what you've become." The patrons, lost to their suffering, drew closer, faces distorting into unrecognizable masks, mouths opening and closing with frantic movements. They seemed to be urging me to join their wretched communion, to succumb to their collective grief. The girl from the void stood among them, now a shade of my worst nightmares, her luminous eyes wide with a silent scream, a warning buried beneath layers of despair. "Help me." She mouthed desperately, but the words shattered against the shrieks that erupted from the bar's depths. The air thickened with sorrow and betrayal, an unholy miasma that choked my resolve. I staggered backward, slamming against the bar's hard surface. "What do you want from me?" I gasped, my throat constricted with terror as I fought to break free from this damned place. But the laughter of the woman intensified, a sound like nails scraping against wood, sending shivers racing down my spine. "Everything," she hissed, a symphony of shadows swirling around her, wrapping her in a dark embrace. "You'll learn that your heart still beats for them. You'll know their pain. Intimately a tether stronger than love or kinship. You're here to become the vessel." Panic consumed me, an inferno of dread. I grasped for any semblance of power within myself, a flicker of resistance to her claims. I shut my eyes tightly, remembering for a fleeting moment the light I had known before. But that light felt distant, a whisper lost in the void, overshadowed by the cries of tortured souls circling me, their horror seeping into my bones. I dared to open my eyes again, my vision blurring with tears of impotent fury. The figures before me had transformed into grotesque caricatures, hands reaching out, fingers clawing for salvation, a salvation that was slipping further away. The woman's form wavered, a roiling mass of shadow and flame, her hunger mounting as she absorbed the fear radiating from everyone in the bar. "Embrace them," she coaxed, her voice now an echo of every soul trapped in that wretched limbo. "Let them in." The walls of the bar warped and twisted, a sickening parody of reality, the familiar wood grain morphing into screams of anguish. "No!" I screamed, fighting against the encroaching darkness. Somewhere in that haze, I felt the faint warmth of the girl's heart still beating like a metronome, urging me on as it intertwined with my own against the rising tide of despair. But as I fought, the ground beneath me began to tremble violently, and the very fabric of the bar began tearing apart, revealing a yawning chasm of pitch-black nothingness. Around the edges, the lost souls became frantic, their cries reaching a fever pitch, filling the air with the stench of fear and despair that threatened to swallow me whole. "Join us!" They wailed in unison, voices echoing endlessly, reverberating within the hollow of my chest. I felt their edges brush against my soul, pulling me closer to the brink. Each whisper was one step deeper into despair, a cold, suffocating dread that sought to erase every fragment of my humanity. Suddenly, a blinding light flared in the distance, illuminating the darkness with a promise of hope faint but unwavering. It created a rift in the void, and I instinctively reached for it, while spitting fire in my chest. The warmth surged back, igniting a flicker of resistance, except the darkness didn't relent. It roared like a beast, clawing at my resolve, dragging me to the cusp of madness. With one last, frantic effort, I lunged toward the light, latching onto that glowing thread of possibility, but as I barreled forward, the woman's voice sliced through the air, sharp as glass. "You can't escape. You belong to the darkness now." Her laugh echoed even as I stumbled through that spectral gateway, arms outstretched. It was a desperate leap toward salvation. The world split around me. I felt myself tearing through dimensions, colliding against unseen walls that pulsated with energy, and then, darkness enveloped me entirely. My scream was swallowed whole. When I opened my eyes once more, the familiar bar was restored, peaceful and covered in an eerie stillness. The patrons resumed their activities, laughter and conversation punctuating the air. Yet I was not the same. The woman was nowhere in sight, but I sensed her presence lingering in the marrow of my bones. But worst of all, a chill crept down my spine as I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. When I looked closer, I saw her lips curve into a mischievous smile that mirrored my own. As horror dripped into my veins, I realized the truth. I had brought something with me from the void, something that no one around me could see, and it was far from done with me yet. The bar hummed with life, an unsettling juxtaposition to the dread coiling within me. My heart raced, but the laughter around me felt jarring, a grotesque serenade layered over the lingering fear I couldn't shake. I blinked hard, focusing on the reflections in glossy surfaces. They danced with smug satisfaction, the memories of the void weaving through my consciousness like a tapestry of nightmares. I hurriedly settled into a corner, the warmth of the wooden table grounding yet suffocating. The laughter of the patrons rang hollow, their faces still were masks of oblivious joy. But I was no longer one of them. The girl's terrified face flashed before my eyes, serving as a constant reminder of the choice I had made, of the thing I had become. I patted my pocket, where a scrap of paper I had clutched earlier lay crumpled. It felt like an anchor to the realm of the living, something solid against the riptide of chaos inside my chest. I unfolded it, a messy scrawl scribbled with urgency, detailing everything I could recall about what I had seen, the shadows, the cries, the woman's voice promising despair and darkness. "Can I help you?" The bartender's voice pulled me from my thoughts, his cheerful demeanor appalling in its normalcy. His eyes twinkled as he laid a drink in front of me. The glass sparkled, glistening under the dim light, yet something about it felt wrong, tainted somehow. No thanks," I stammered, a bead of sweat dripping down my brow. "I'm fine." He frowned, a momentary flicker of confusion crossing his face before he turned away. A chill wove its way through the air. Surely the patrons must feel it, the oppressive weight of despair that loomed above us. But they continued their frivolous chatter, raising glasses in toasts, unperturbed by the shadows creeping silently closer from the edges. I glanced toward the mirror again. The reflection was alive with movement, whispering secrets I shouldn't hear. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow in the bar's reflection. At first, it seemed like just another customer, but the figure morphed into an obscurity, a swirling mist that twined closer to me, wrapping faint tendrils around my throat. Panic clawed at my insides, the warmth of the drink long forgotten as I squeezed my eyes shut, taking deep, shaky breaths. The shadows of the bar faded, replaced by the memories of my harrowing journey through the void. I could see the girl's face again, the frantic urgency etched into every part of her expression, as if she were still trapped somewhere in that darkness. Suddenly, a loud, piercing scream erupted from the entrance, shattering through the revelry like glass. Heads turned sharply, laughter stilled. A young man stumbled in, eyes wide and frantic, drenched in sweat, his clothes torn as if he had woven through thorny underbrush. "Help! You have to help me. It's after me." His voice trembled, quaking under the weight of dread. The bar's atmosphere shifted once again, shadows thickening, greedily drawing closer as if responding to the man's fear. Patrons looked on, some laughing uncomfortably, others murmuring in disbelief, "Someone call the cops." The man yelled, glancing around desperately, eyes darting. "I can't be alone, I can't." But before anyone could respond, the lighting flickered ominously. Dark tendrils spiraled out from the corners of the room, twisting, slithering through the air as though the shadows themselves were alive. The laughter turned into hysterical murmurs, and I felt it, the nan awakening beneath the surface. The bartender, face paling, began sweeping things in the back, retreating from the chaos forming before him. I rose instinctively, moving to help the young man, but the shadows surged forward, swallowing his desperate plea. No. I screamed, pushing against the wave of thick darkness, but the sinister presence coiling around me pulled me back, deeper into the abyss that had become my life. The crowd erupted in chaos as the shadows converged with a deafening roar, engulfing the frightened man entirely, and then, just as abruptly as it had begun, silence fell. The lights blared back to life, illuminating the bar in a sickly fluorescent glow. But the young man had vanished, replaced by a heavy stillness that draped over us like a funeral shroud. Visions danced within the mirror, a merciless reflection of the Xenia smirk hidden beneath the surface. The woman's voice echoed in my mind, whispering promises of despair. I could feel her lurking behind my thoughts every moment, an ever-looming presence that was growing restless and insatiable. The bar buzzed uncertainly, the patrons' gazes shifting as if awakening from a grim dream, but I knew something had been unleashed. As laughter resumed with uncertainty, I felt a cold sweat creeping down my back, my heart drumming a frantic beat against my ribs. Then, I heard a voice not my own, soft and taunting, slipping through the veil of my consciousness. "You brought me back. Now let's have some fun." With that, the lights flickered again, and a crack appeared in the safety of my reality. An air of mourning swept through the room as I braced for the unraveling of my identity against the turbulent shadows manifesting once more. Panic seized me and, in that moment of foreboding, I understood I had not just walked away from the void, I'd opened a door. And whatever lay on the other side was clawing its way back to the world of the living. The atmosphere thickened with dread, the fluorescent lights flickering in sync with my racing heartbeat. I could feel a palpable shift in the air, a pressure building around me as the shadowy edges of the bar seemed to undulate, a sinister tide crawling toward the startled patrons who had returned to their laughter, blissfully unaware of the malevolence that had just been unleashed. I backed away from the mirror, my mind reeling as the echoes of the woman's voice coiled tightly around my thoughts. "You brought me back, now let's have some fun." Her silky, sinister tones intertwined with the thought scratching at my conscience, a cruel reminder of my fragility. No one else seemed aware, but I could feel it, the bleak emptiness that devoured the space, wrapping around my throat like a noose. The bartender returned, wiping his hands with an anxiety that betrayed his calm facade, glancing at me and then quickly turning his gaze away. Beneath his false bravado, I sensed a mutual acknowledgement of the darkness now bubbling just below the surface. The patrons resumed their revelry, laughter masking the tremors of fear that snaked through the room, yet as I turned to exit, I found my path blocked. From the bar's rear emerged a figure tall and impossibly thin, swathed in shadows that congealed like dark liquid around its form. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light that pierced the dim atmosphere, a sickly yellow gleam that seemed to consume all the light around it. My breath quickened as I took a step back, heart racing with terror. The figure Granita twisted, too wide smile that carved an unsettling gash across its face. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor, paralyzed by a fear deeper than anything I had known. "Ah, the one who danced with the void," it hissed, voice dripping with amusement, as though it were savoring every word. "Such a potent offering you are. Care to share your darkness with us?" I struggled to turn away, but tendrils of shadow reached toward me, wrapping around my wrists, tugging me closer to the abyss unfurling before me. I could hear the whispers of the crowd hushed, frantic, yet my mind was elsewhere, consumed by the figure's gaze that radiated despair. Visions of the girl's terrified face danced through my mind, merging with the figure's laughter, creating a cacophony of stitched-together horrors that clawed at my sanity. The air grew heavy, stifling. I gasped for breath as panic gnawed at my resolve. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, desperately trying to break free from the encroaching darkness, but it only tightened its grip. "Leave you alone?" The figure crooned mockingly, its voice a velvet snare, tender yet laced with venom. "But why would I do such a thing? You've invited me in, dear one. Every fear, every regret is a feast, a banquet just for me." Around me, the atmosphere rippled, the patrons still oblivious to the gathering horror, laughing as if they were part of an insidious play. The air crackled with energy, while the shadows crawled and slithered, intrigued by the figure's presence, seductively beckoning to me from the edges of reality. I ripped my eyes away, focusing instead on the entrancing glimmer of hope lurking just beyond the veil of despair. If I could make it past the figure, maybe I could escape this waking nightmare. But then the laughter faltered, replaced by a chorus of gasps. I turned back sharply. The reflection in the mirror had shifted again. The scene it reflected morphed into a grotesque tableau, a masked audience of passionless faces wearing expressions of hollow delight, reveling in my terror, their mouths stitched shut. The young man, the one who had screamed, now stood frozen among them, eyes wide and pleading, his silhouette fading like a distorted memory. As if sensing my gaze, the figure leaned closer, whispering secrets only the void could know. "They are here for you, just as I am. You have unwittingly become the star of tonight's performance." In horror, I realized my own face had joined the disfigured tableau, reflected behind the shadows in grotesque parody, stripped of my humanity. Was I to become just another unwitting player, anchored in this nightmare? Suddenly, the figure snapped its fingers, and at once, the shadows surged with a deafening roar. An unrelenting vortex of darkness spiraled, swirling around, tugging at my very essence, dragging me further down into a reality where hope dimmed like a dying flame. In that terrifying moment, the bartender's voice broke through, barely above a whisper. "It's already too late. They've chosen you." With a final, insatiable pull, the shadows surged upward, engulfing everything: the bar, the twisted patrons, and then I felt the whispering void wrap around me, pulling me closer to the edge of consciousness. As blackness closed in like a sinister embrace, the last thing I heard was the haunting echo of laughter, a chorus of souls awakened by my fear. And just as I succumbed to the darkness, a blood-curdling scream pierced through the night, echoing from somewhere deep within the void, calling me home. I awoke not in the comforting chaos of the bar, but in an unsettling stillness, surrounded by flickering candlelight. My heart thundered, raw and pulsing, thrumming against the weight of uncertainty pressing down like an oppressive fog. I was no longer an observer of the horror, I was ensnared within it, a marionette suspended in gloom, the strings pulled by unseen hands. The walls around me were adorned with shadows, their shapes writhing beneath the faint light, as if alive, murmuring secrets I dared not comprehend. A chill snaked along my spine as I pushed to my feet, the coldness biting at my skin. The remnants of the bar faded, and in their place stood a circular room with wooden panels, their surfaces tarnished and slick with a haunting sheen. The air stank of mildew and old memories, breeding a sense of dread that clung to my every breath. "Welcome back," a voice purred, smooth yet jagged like glass. I whipped around, my pulse hitching in my throat. It was Hera, figure draped in shadows, the woman from the bar. The smile carved into her face twisted towards me, promising secrets wrapped in despair. "You journeyed far, dear one, which I greatly appreciate. However, you should be prepared. The void has its price. What do you want from me?" I growled, wild terror piercing my resolve. Every inch of my body screamed to flee, to escape this tether that had connected me to her sinister nature. She approached, gliding through the room, and with a flick of her wrist, the walls shifted, folding in on themselves. It felt as if reality itself quivered, and in that hesitation, I saw shadows coalescing into tortured shapes, lost faces, crying out, woven pleas strung together like a macabre tapestry. They began to chant, a chorus of anguish swelling within the confines of my chest. "To join us," she whispered, voice oozing with promise. "You have already fed the darkness with your fear, you simply must learn to embrace it. The others have already tasted its sweet embrace." Her eyes flickered, and I saw limp, hollow shells in the space behind her, a gallery of those who once stood where I was, all lost to the void. No. "I won't do it," I shouted, terror spurring me into action, seeking escape from this hell. In response, the walls rippled like water, shadows stretching and curling toward me, hungry for my defiance. "Can you not see they depend on you?" she implored, softening, the edges of her demeanor fraying into something more insidious. "Do you not recognize the bond? You bring all that you've touched from the bar. It's a lineage you cannot break." Suddenly, a spotlight turned in the darkness, illuminating the center of the room, a makeshift stage clad in the writhing shadows. The laughter cascaded around me, the faces forming a grotesque audience, watching, waiting. I began to realize they were not spectators, they were prisoners, like meth remnants of joy turned to despair. No. The word erupted from my throat, a plea fading into desperation as I remembered the girl, the urgent cry for help swallowed by the void. In my mind sang the echoes of myriad souls begging for release, a collective of lost hopes and forgotten dreams. I felt the weight of their sorrow pressing down upon me, an insistent pressure I could no longer contain. "You must perform," the woman hissed, her expression teetering on mania as her eyes glowed brighter. "But do not worry, they will guide you. Emotions feed them, let your fear flow, dear one." The shadows coiled around my fingers, tugging me towards the stage. Panic clawed my throat as distant voices rang in my mind, calling my name, intertwining with my own thoughts. "You belong to the void now. Accept it," they cried, threatening to trim the last tether of my sanity, and in a horrifying moment of clarity, I understood, this was never simply about escape. The darkness wasn't merely a prison, it was an entity, hungry for new souls to weave into its tapestry of despair. I stumbled forward, but halted as the stage began to warp and twist, projecting memories of the barth laughter, the music, the bodies writhing and spinning in their own agonizing euphoria. Before I could think, I fell into the performance, the shadows forcing me to recount every moment I'd witnessed, a dark ballet performed for an audience that craved suffering. Each story unleashed an electrifying current, drawing power from my fear, feeding them all. It was the horror of reliving tales of terror that ripped through me, echoing the girl's anguished plea and the fateful choices I had made. "Let them free." I cried out between shudders, but my voice rang hollow, drowned out by the chorus of laughter and applause rising from the void. The laughter morphed into wails, a tide of menacing joy, and it gripped me in an unbreakable hold. I flailed against the entrapment of my own reckoning. Suddenly, the girl's face emerged from the shadows. Her eyes glimmered with trust turned to panic, a plea surrounding her. "You didn't help me. Find me." She began circling the stage, the shadows trying to pull her further in, and it ignited a fire I thought long extinguished. No. I screamed, pushing against the shadows. "I will save her." I fought through the darkness, tearing at its constraints with everything I possessed. The laughter turned into enraged howls, the figures writhing at the edges of my vision, but my focus remained locked onto the girl. I surged forward, guttural desperation fueling my every movement despite the shadow's looming threat. Nothing could have prepared me for the moment I grasped her hand, the warmth of life wrapping around my fingers. The sound of her anguished cries soared into the air, intertwining with mine. As we turned to face the encroaching darkness, the shadowy tendrils began to recoil, screaming in fury at the light we shared, illuminating a path that intersected the void. Together, we leaped toward the yawning black, hoping that love, however flickering, would cut through the fabric of despair and reclaim not just her soul, but potentially mine. In that terrifying leap, the darkness screeched a sound that pierced through dimensions and rattled reality, and as we plunged through the veil, I could feel the echoes of those lost twisted into haunting melodies. With one final cry, I realized I hadn't just opened a door, I had opened a chasm. A void still awaiting its offering, and as I fell deeper, the last remnants of her voice hung in my mind, echoing hauntingly through the impending darkness. You belong to the void now. The shadows swept over us, yet this time, I felt a warmth blooming in my chest. The darkness wasn't just despair, it was an acceptance of the truth. My last thought before everything dissolved into pitch-black silence was a dreadful understanding of horror forever intertwined with reality. I had forsaken the light, yet I had finally found a purpose among the lost. In the cold, an echo reverberated around USA laughing silence, a finality that rang out with a chilling promise: you will never truly leave.